Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Possibility Podcast. I'm excited today to have Mr. Ron Karr along. I'm a massive fan of Ron. I've been a fan of the National Speakers Association in America for a long time. So Ron's name's been very familiar to me. But that's all right for me. What about you? So Ron is a leadership, business development, marketing, and sales success expert. He's appeared on TV, radio, and the press all around the world, but it's the first time here on the Possibility Podcast. As I said, he's the past president of the prestigious National Speakers Association, which is his Mount Everest and will be anybody's, quite frankly. He's also the author of 5 books. And the two that strike me is Lead, Sell, or Get Out of the Way, something I find very interesting. And his latest, The Velocity Mindset. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you. How are you doing, Rob?
I'm going well, Ron. Going very well. Hey, this is the Possibility Podcast. So I'm going to ask you a question straight up. I know you're going to love this one, which is, what does the word possibility mean to you?
That anything is open and available.
Anything is open, anything is available. Yeah, I love that. And I love, one of the things I like to do, and I know you this is very close to your heart as well, is turning possibility into probability.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I've always grown up with a positive mindset. So when someone says you can't do that, I'm sitting there going, okay, let's think about it. So I know that there's always a way to get somewhere. The question is, are we finding the right way? The second question is, do we really want to get there? Is our passion behind it? And our third question is, are we letting our stories and our fears prevent us from going there?
Yeah, 100%. I really like that. I think there's a great book by John Maxwell, if you haven't read it, called Putting Your Dreams to the Test.
Right.
And it's literally about that. Like, do you really want it? Are you prepared to pay the price for it? And are you prepared to pay the price now? And they are 3 profound questions that, I'm optimistic. I got a positive mindset. And sometimes when you stop and you go, hang on a second, I really, really want it. Am I prepared to pay the price? And are you prepared to pay it now? Because you might be prepared to pay it, but not right now. And so they're 3 great questions. But look, I wanted to talk to you about the velocity mindset, because I really love the velocity mindset. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions around the book, but tell me why did you feel the need to write it? Because you had a great book, Lead, Sell, Get Out of the Way. You've had other books as well. What was the need to write the velocity mindset?
It's what we just talked about, my passion. So my passion was, I started in sales training 33 years ago after being in sales and management for 10 years. And then it morphed into keynote speaking and being an advisor to the board of directors, and then doing annual retainers where I'm coaching and consulting with the C-suite of organizations. When my presidency that you alluded to was over in June of 2014, I faced 9 surgeries in 3 years, mostly on my back. Tiger Woods had 1 level fused. I had 9 levels fused. So I was down a lot. And while
are you a golfer?
down,
Ron, I got to ask you, are you a golfer?
Yeah, and I'm still playing golf now with the 9 levels.
Yeah, take that, Tiger.
I lost some distance, but I'm still playing. So the point is that when you're sitting down, laying down as I was, and pain pills, you start evaluating your life. At that time, I was approaching 60, and you start looking at your life. And I looked at all my successes, but then I also looked at the things I didn't achieve, and I asked myself why. And it all came down to the same thing I coach CEOs on. It was fears and stories that I was living my life by that prevented me from getting there. So I hired a gentleman to come down and film me in one of my keynotes after I recuperated, because I had to get some new materials out. And I was thinking about rebranding myself. And he called me up the next day and he said, I got your brand. I go, what? He goes, Velocity Mindset. I go, what? And it hit me right between the eyes, but I said, why did you come up with that? He goes, it's all you talk about. It's all you talked about in the keynote. I looked at all your materials. You had it published for the last 10 years, and it fits you. So I started thinking about it, because when you think about it, you're 60 now. Today I'm 64. Your runway is kind of getting short. So if you really want to do some things, you can't let the same things that stopped you get in the way now. So when I started really studying the concept of velocity, I realized everybody was dealing with the wrong definition. So a little trick. Rob, when you hear velocity, what's the word that comes to your mind?
Well, for me, it's speed and direction and alignment, but that's because I'm a sailor.
Yeah. And most people would not say that, by the way. Most people would say speed.
Yes. Speed's the first one, isn't it? It's the first one. Yeah.
Right. But that's not velocity. And that's all you have. then you're busy, in the rat race, you're doing all you have to do is, in the end of the day, you ask yourself sometimes, what did I accomplish?
Yeah.
What am I fulfilled?
Yeah.
So I realized, the physics definition is speed with direction.
Yeah.
So it aligned with everything that I've been doing up to this point, but now it's getting more of a passion to create a movement in the world called the velocity mindset. And what I want to make sure is that people achieve what it is they want in life, and they do not let the things that stop them, which are usually internal, get in the way.
Yeah.
That's my mission right now.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, it's very much aligned to, my book, It's All Possible, which is around exactly that, which is about possibility, the probability, and what was holding you back. I made the point on the velocity. Have you heard the term VMG?
No, go ahead.
Yes, so VMG is a sailing term, which is speed made good. So it's velocity made good. So that's why I answered the question, not because I was trying to be smart, but it's a great one for you. And hey, you might want to take it. But yeah, VMG,
no, I like it.
Actually on every racing yacht, like a decent size racing yacht, it has a VMG gauge. It literally says VMG, and it's up on the mast, so all the crew can see it. And VMG is speed made good to the mark. So you can go super fast, but if that's not going to get you to the first mark or the second mark to win the race, you can go fast all you like. You can do all that activity. So and that's kind of why I got the when I started reading your materials, I was like, this is so spot on.
Yeah, and as you just said, going fast is not the answer. Sometimes I did a video just recently. I said, people get surprised when I say to gain velocity, sometimes you have to slow down. I say, no, it's not slow down. Sometimes you have to just stop.
Yeah, stop. That's it.
Reevaluate what you're going after. Is it still what you truly want? And are your actions getting us there? And we all did that, by the way.
Yeah.
When the lockdown started, we all stopped. It was a forced stop.
Yes.
But then many people started reevaluating what they were doing, and they didn't like what they were seeing. So they started moving to different places in the country, started new lifestyles and all that. And that came from a forced stop. But why do you have to wait for something to force you to stop? Why can't you stop on your own?
It's a great question. I think that, one of the things I find, especially with leaders and business owners and entrepreneurs and, people who are moving fast or feel like they've got to keep on moving along, is that finding that area for what I call, it's a coin, John Maxwell came up with it. It's a thing around margin. So he uses a term called margin, which is the difference between what you can do and what you are doing. And if they're the same thing, which they are for most people, right, you have no bandwidth. That's going to lead to burnout. And I find that people, if they don't, really create that margin for themselves, because you have to be very intentional about it. You have to actually pause and sometimes stop, as you say. I find leaders, I don't know if you find this, but I find sometimes leaders create margin for themselves by saying, I'm going to block out 2 hours. And all they do is they don't actually create any margin for themselves. They just do the stuff they're supposed to do. So, they're managing people, then they do their stuff, but they still haven't got it. But it's so important to pause, isn't it?
It is. So one of the sub premises of the book is, what would the world look like if everybody acted like a leader and not as a victim of circumstance? So this is about personal leadership as well as leading others and getting to where you want to be. In the case that I put in the book, my first job out of college, Rob, was selling copiers.
Right.
And I remember when I was hired by Royal Business Machines, it was their new plain bond copier, out with the liquid toner that messed up everybody's dresses and clothes.
Yeah.
And they seduced me. Look how crisp the copies are, 15 a minute. It's perfect. I said, where's the collator? Don't worry, I'll come in 6 months. Where's the other thing? In 6 months. It didn't come for 2 years. So I'd be going into offices and they say, well, can you do what the Xerox does on the third floor? And I go, no. And they said, well, come back when you can. Well, after being kicked out enough and not getting to where I wanted to be, I had two choices. I could blame my company, which I did for the first couple of months, but that didn't really help me. Like, you didn't come through with your promises. Or I could find a way to succeed with what I have. So I went to a diner and I had a board meeting we talk about in the book.
Yeah.
And I had it with me, myself, and I. And I said, okay, what are you trying to sell? A copier. What happens? They compare you to the Xerox. You can't compete. Okay, right? Are you really selling a copier? And I thought about it. The answer was no. A copier is nothing more than a communication vehicle. So I decided to change the conversation. So when I went on my next stop, I said, look, would you agree with me that a copy is nothing more than a communication vehicle? And they said, absolutely. I said, well, when it comes to that, what are your three biggest challenges? Oh my God, Rob, they started getting emotional. Do you know how long it takes for Sally or Joe on the first floor to have one copy to get up, chit chat along the way to the staircase, go upstairs, wait behind all those big jobs, and finally come down with that one copy? Do you know how long it takes? I said, how long? 2 hours sometimes. I go, wow. How often does that happen in a week? And this one person said, try the equivalent of 2 full-time employees. I said, how would you like them back? I said, how are you going to do that? I said, look, I'm not competing against Xerox. It's a great machine. Keep it. But my machine is going to solve the problem you just talked about. Instead of having to go up for those trips, why don't you put one of my machines on every floor? You'll get those single copies done in less than 5 minutes, and you'll be on your way. I started selling 3 at a time. But that came from me stopping. Yes. I didn't like the results. I wasn't getting to where I wanted to be. Instead of blaming somebody else, I said, okay, what are you doing? What are you selling? What's the outcome? And I tried something different, and it led to a much different result.
Well, I think the thing you started to do then, Ron, was you were bringing insight to the conversation, but you're also, as you and I are passionate about, you're leading the sale, and that means you are providing guidance to that particular person. You're not just flogging something or regurgitating the product stuff, which so many people get to do, don't they? And they just get trained up in it. But you are leading that transaction with the best intention of the customer at in your heart.
Yeah, so you mentioned my other book that came before this one called Lead, Sell, Get Out of the Way. That's why we titled it that way. What we were saying at that time was, if you really want to sell, you better act like a leader. Yeah. And what do leaders do? They help people achieve success. They help people achieve better results that are beyond their wildest dreams by finding out what's going on, where they're trying to go, what's stopping them, and then providing in context how they can help them. Yeah. So that's exactly the same principle.
I wish there was so much more of it, because that's really what leading the sale, and great salesmen all around the world, no matter where they are and what they sell, that's what they do. They're enablers, and they really, I call they've got 3 things they study. The students of the customer, students of the industry, and students of their own firm, for goodness sake. And that's what they do and bring it to them. Talk about the board meeting, which you touched on a second ago. I think it's so powerful. Just to pause, you said you had your board meeting with yourself. And how would you encourage people to have a board meeting with themselves?
So I have a friend who read the book, and she posted a review on Amazon, and she said it changed her life because she's very successful in real estate. But she's been going fast like everybody else. And she took that concept of a board meeting and sat down and started thinking about what she really wanted, what she was dealing with. And she came up with a whole different action plan that's making dramatic improvements in her life. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, look, something doesn't have to be wrong to have a board meeting. You should have a board meeting occasionally, like companies do, whether it's every quarter, every other month, and you'll say, okay, the outcome that you want to achieve in life and what you're doing in this project, is it still the same? Yep. Okay, check. Are the actions working? So. Which ones are not? And then you start thinking about it, and you're saying, what could I do differently to get to where I want to be faster, so I can move on to other things? That's what a board meeting does. Yeah. It reevaluates. It makes sure that you're still on the same path you want to be. Great. Are you doing the right things? If not, what could you do differently? But we all are so fast, we never take the time to stop. That's what the board meeting is about.
Yeah, that's the great thing about the pause. And I think it's a great point. We should do them often, but I think one of the guys I'm doing some work with, the guy who heads up Proteus Leadership, guy called Des Penny, says I'm a great strategic quitter. And I love that term. And I said, tell me more about that. And he said, well, sometimes you get to a point where you do take the pause, you do have the board meeting with yourself, and you realize actually that's not the direction we're going now. So stop piling more on. I find that people have the board meeting sometimes, but they don't quit anything. They don't take anything away. And there's still only this 24 hours in the day. They keep adding more on. And so he said, I've learned, he said, he's similar age to yourself. And he said, I've just learned now, to be a strategic quitter. Sometimes what sounded great back then, and COVID's a good example of that, is that now doesn't make sense. So we should redirect our energy and go this way.
But you owe that also to do that, not just for yourself, but for the people who depend on you.
Yes. Yeah.
Because if you don't help them become successful, and you're telling them to do things that are not going to help them get to where they want to be, it affects morale negatively. It affects productivity. So it's not even a situation of doing it as a luxury item or task. You have to do that if you
Yeah.
want to stay on purpose for yourself and for your company.
Yeah, and you find the most successful organizations, in terms of some of the more high-profile ones, but if you look at some of the stuff they do on OKRs and things like that, one of the questions on OKRs is, is it still relevant? If it's not achieving what it's meant to be achieving, what are we going to do about it? Secondly, is it still strategic? Is the measurement, right, or is it wrong? But is it actually the right objective to be going for in the first place? So I think it's a great question to do, and you can only do it, though, to your point, when you have the pause. The other thing that you talked about was intuition, the importance of intuition in problem solving. We call that gut feel in Australia. I don't know if you guys use that word, but that kind of intuition. But tell me about that. Why do you say intuition is important in problem solving?
So I'll explain it, then I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So in the mid 90s, when I joined NSA in the early 90s, there was a woman in my New York chapter who was a specialist in intuition. Now, at that time, when I was starting my career in speaking and consulting, I was still a hardcore business guy. Intuition, oh, give me a break. This is too fluff. Get away from me. But what she said stuck with me, and I kept thinking about it. And as I grew over the years, I studied it more. And as I learned to trust my gut feeling, it really has paid dividends. So let me give you an example. I finished the manuscript for the Velocity Mindset at the end of September. We signed a lease for a place to move to in Florida starting in November. I had a heart murmur all my life, and they were tracking my aorta valve, and it was getting tighter, but they said, it should last to the 70s. Well, my gut, my intuition started telling me, you know what? You better get another echo before you leave because you may not go to Florida. They go, come on. I said, look, you just wrote about this. So you're either going to practice what you preach or not do it. So I called up the cardiologist, went for the echo, and all of a sudden he pulled the fire alarm. He said, you're not going. I go, what do you mean? He goes, you got to have this thing fixed now. Your life's in danger right now. It is so tight. And so I said, okay. So that's how the intuition worked. And you got to remember something about your gut or the intuition. It's really the subconscious. What's in the subconscious? All your collected experiences, all your biases, everything you know about yourself, true or not true, everything you know you want to do, not do, everything you know you will do, won't do. So it's that whole composite, if you will. So when I coach people and I say, what is your gut telling you? If they take more than a second to respond, they're back up in their mind. They're trying to rationalize.
Back up in the conscious, aren't they? Yeah.
And they're trying to rationalize. I said, no. If you're really going to listen to your gut, it's an instantaneous answer. Just ask yourself the question. It should come from your heart, and it will come immediately. So, for instance, many times I'm typing an email to somebody or a prospect, and I say, do I really want to say that? My heart says, no, I delete it. I've learned to trust it.
Yeah.
Or my gut's telling me to do something that I don't want to do. Like the echo, I've learned to trust it. So that's what intuition is all about.
I think that's
because one more thing, and I'm sorry, when you're a leader, decisions you have to make are not easy. True. And sometimes you don't have the guarantees and all the facts. Sometimes you just have to, especially if you're going after new ground where there is no data, you're going to have to make a decision. And sometimes your intuition plays a big part in that.
Do you think that's why you see so many leaders procrastinate and don't make decisions?
Well, procrastination is a different animal. There's a lot of reasons for procrastination. It's not just not relying on the intuition. If it leads to procrastination, it means that they haven't learned to trust their intuition.
That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's many things to procrastination. I mean, you're going after something so big, you have no idea how to do it. Then all of a sudden you freak out. When the one thing you want to do is just break it down to smaller bite-sized chunks, easier to maneuver and take a hold of, and then go out and do it, then do the next one and the next one. Procrastination could be because you don't have a belief in what you're trying to do. Your passion's not there.
Yeah.
Procrastination could be you need other people to help you, but you don't know how to enroll them to support you. Yeah. That's what we teach in the Velocity Mindset. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why procrastination happens.
Yeah, there's a great, we'll talk about influence in a second and around around buying, because I think that's a really important part. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was around the velocity mindset, but also around this area of friction. And I said Peter Drucker had a great quote, which was, he said, there's only three things happen naturally in business: friction, confusion, and underperformance. The rest is up to leadership, which I thought was one of, Peter Drucker's very dry, but he hits it on the nail so many times. Why do you think friction happens in business?
It's simple. Anytime you bring two people together, you have automatic friction. Why? They have a different way of looking at life. Now, it becomes friction when they don't work together.
Right.
It becomes friction when one side tries to involve the other side and get them to convert to their way of thinking about compromising. It becomes friction when someone feels they're not being heard or listened to.
Yeah.
But anytime you bring two people together that have different experiences and lifestyles, it is a fertile ground for friction.
Yeah, it's a
And
great.
sometimes friction is not bad.
True. Yeah. Well, if it creates a difference, it creates a better outcome.
Well, yes, but if you don't let the friction become a divider, and you
Yes.
use the friction to challenge one's assumptions, and together you get into a great conversation where when 1 + 1 = 3, meaning you bring your ideas together and you come up with an idea you would never have had without that conversation. That's good friction.
Yeah. 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 I think that makes good friction because it's actually what I call positive friction. It's going the right way. But it's just interesting. I mean, even that example you gave around the photocopiers when they're going upstairs, and that's friction, isn't it? I mean, that's just slowing down this whole thing when they haven't, stood back and it wasn't rocket science what you came up with, but they hadn't paused, right? Whatever was going on there, they hadn't paused, and that's
but why didn't they pause? Because they had a story going. We got this big machine. We're not going to invest in knowing where it is. That's where the copies are made. It was a story.
Yeah.
They didn't go with what you thought about what you said earlier, Robin. You said, do you believe in possibility? Do you believe that there is another solution? It took someone like me to ask a question to make them start thinking differently. Not me telling them, me asking them a question that led to a whole new result for them.
I really like that too, Ron. I mean, it's about asking the question. I mean, if you think you got the answer, and God, I've been guilty of doing that too many times in my early sales career. I see the problem, I know how to find it. I just want to give them the answer, and it's not the way to do it. It's just that's not the way to go about it. You'll get there, but that's not the way to go about it.
And there's a reason for that. Sales is influence, just like leadership is, right? People do things for their own reasons, not for yours.
Yeah.
So number one, if I start going in and I know the issue and I know the answer, and I start talking about the answer, first of all, I don't have an emotional connection. There's two parts to influence, the heart and the mind. We talked about that before. The heart's where the emotional connection is. The mind is where they evaluate. So if I go straight to offering a solution and I didn't get an emotional connection, and they start to evaluate, they're evaluating it on deaf ears, meaning there's no context to what they're listening to. So it doesn't mean anything to them, number one. Plus, they're saying in their own minds, why is this guy prescribing for me? He has no clue what I'm going through.
Yeah.
So there's a psychological process you cannot circumvent. You got to ask people where you're trying to go, what outcomes you want, and what are your challenges. Then, and what you're doing then is they're not going up here, they're going down here. They're going to the answers that are causing them emotional pain. What's stopping them? Where do they want to go? The things they wish they had that they don't have. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So you got that emotional connection going. Now, when you present your solution, you're presenting it in context to what's important to them. Now they're hearing it.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing for your listeners to understand.
Yeah.
You can give them all the right answers up front, but if you don't get them to talk first, they're not listening to it, and there is no influence.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. It took me a while to 100% agree, but I 100% agree. When you got to, because you're in contributing and you're collaborating and you come back. I tell you what, it's also a great thing, Ron. I found out more in the complex selling environment. It's also a great way to find if you're talking to the right buying influence, because if they can't actually connect to the real problem and start talking from the heart, they're probably regurgitating what someone else told them to go talk to you about. And that's also a nice way. It's always an upside. There's no bad answers. There's always a great answer. There's someone else in the sales cycle we need to talk to who maybe understands the problem better. It's nothing wrong with the person you're talking to. But
absolutely, I was just contacted by a potential prospect who wanted me to do some executive coaching for her, and I gave her the proposal, and she said, "Well, my COO wants to know if we can combine that with working 10 people on my team as a team and me individually." I said, well, let's have a conversation with the CRO, because for me to do that, and I need to find out what's important to him. And that's what we're waiting for.
Yeah. You got to do it. There's no other way you can be at your best without having that knowledge, is there?
Right. And I'm not going to rely on anybody else's idea of what they think the person wants.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, they may know what the person wants, but I still have to have the conversation, because I have to have that emotional connection.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Hey, I just thought on that, the velocity mindset and friction, it's a really good book. I just interviewed the author just recently. It's a book called Run Frictionless. I don't know if you've seen it. It's Run Frictionless by a guy called Anthony Kondoris. And it's all about how to remove the friction out of organizations, especially entrepreneurial and startup businesses as they start to grow. I think you'd really like it. He's got a fabulous, simple 4-step model on how to make your business run frictionless, and that why some friction's good and why some friction just doesn't need to be it. It's all about asking great questions. I think you'd enjoy it. The other thing we talked about was the neuroscience of trust. And tell me about that. I'm a big fan on trust. It's a huge value, but you talked about the neuroscience of trust. Can you explain that a little more?
So as we were talking about how to get influence, so we zero in on 3 hormones in the brain that are studied in neuroscience. And I kind of stumbled into this because I was doing some work for a major financial services company. Took them 5 calls to get a new investor on board. When we were done, they were down to 3 calls. Why? Because when they go and meet a new investor, they start chit-chatting about the family, about the pictures of the Bears games and the grandkids. And I can see the eyes rolling up like, what are you doing here? And then they go into the how. I deal in stocks and bonds. Tell me what you're doing. Well, automatically they lose their attention because they already have somebody for that. So I pulled them aside and I said, look, I don't want you having 12 minutes of chit chat. Make it 30 seconds and just say, look, I'm not here about your stocks and bonds. I know you got somebody. I'm here about your future. Can I ask you a question? And most of them will say yes. And the question we came up with, what are the 3 things you want your money to provide for you in the future? And when they asked that question, all of a sudden we saw people's eyes rolling up. So we kept doing it and the eyes kept rolling up all the time. To this day, I've been doing it for 20 years, people's eyes roll up when I ask that kind of a question. So the neuroscience came out and I got together with Scott Halford, who got his PhD in neuroscience, as a friend of mine, and we talked about it. And he told me, you need to concentrate on these 3 hormones. And now he's amazed at how I linked it to sales and leadership. When you think about a sales call, Rob, if you're my client or a prospect and I call you and you're not expecting me, I'm an interruption, right?
Yes, correct.
How do you feel when you're at your desk and you're in the middle of a train of thought and you get interrupted? You're a little stressed, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So cortisol is a fight or flight hormone. And cortisol is on a continuum, let's say from 1 to 10. 1 and 2 means the cortisol is not stopping you, but it's really low, so you're not really engaged. 4 to 5 is where you really want it. They're really engaged. They're listening to every word. They want to go. 6, they start having some doubts. 7, they start thinking more. 8, they're checking out. 9, 10, they checked out physically or mentally.
Yeah.
So if you understand that if I'm calling you unexpected, number 1, where do you think your cortisol is going to be the moment you answer the phone?
Well, it's either going to be I'm either going to be at higher up, either at 8 or 9, because I'm either stressed or I'm busy, I'm doing something, especially the clients they're probably going to be calling would be at that level.
Right. So they're busy.
Yeah.
And you interrupted them and they have no clue what you want.
Yeah.
So the first thing I want your listeners to understand is anytime you make an unsurprised visit or call to an employee or a customer, it's an interruption. And if you accept that your role is as a leader, even in sales, then the first thing you have to do is anticipate that and create a safe environment for people to want to talk to you. So what I do now in my speeches, even remotely, we actually do role plays. And I'll have someone play a customer, another person play the salesperson. And they'll start, and they'll usually start with the same way most salespeople do. I represent this financial services. I want to talk to you about stocks and bonds. We got great investments in some 401ks and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then I'll ask the person, where's your cortisol now at the beginning? Oh, it's high. And then I'll say, based on what they said the first 2 minutes, what happened to your cortisol? It either stayed very high or came down a little bit, but it still wasn't where it needed to be.
Mm.
So then I change the role play. I'll take the person to the side and I'll say, look, to start the meeting again, we'll just say, when it comes to success this year, what are the 3 things you're looking to achieve? Something like that. And all of a sudden the person's eyes rolls up.
Yeah.
And I started realizing there's a change in the brain at that time. So what's happening when your eyes roll up and you start going left or right, depending on what hemisphere your brain is, centered around, right hemisphere, left hemisphere, you're going to now start giving some answers. So that means one of two things. Your cortisol went down, but it's still very engaged because you're still talking to me. I have your interest, right? But why would you be giving me the information? You have to trust me. So oxytocin is the love hormone and also the hormone of trust. Now, trust is earned. It takes time to really earn explicit trust. But every second you're with somebody, every time you do something, you still have to have trust for that 1 second for them to want to play with you, right?
Yeah.
So by asking somebody where they're trying to go, all of a sudden their guard is down. They no longer think you're trying to sell them something they don't need. It's about them. They're engaged. And now they're giving you that information because they figure if you're asking me about this, you possibly could help me. So now they're trusting you enough to give you that information. And then the dopamine hormone, which is the feel good, rides with oxytocin. So if I start trusting you and I give you the information, I'm starting to feel better about this call because there's hope for me getting some answers to what I'm looking to achieve.
Yeah.
So when I take them through this interactive and they can see the transformation right in front of them, it blows people's minds.
Yeah. Have you ever done it with Australians?
I've spoken in Australia, but I haven't done that role play with Australians, but it would still work. I mean, I know there's different words and in the language, even though it's still English, but go ahead. Why are you asking?
I think in just in the amount of time and the amount of prank calls, cybercrime, just everything going up at the moment here. If you didn't know anyone, if you didn't have a referral and you simply came on going, hey, I'd like to just tell me about what your successes are this year without any background, or you wouldn't get an answer. You'd get a
well, but you're right. But understand one thing. That's the hardest thing to do is make a cold call from scratch. This, what I'm talking about, applies for any call. Even if you have a meeting, you still have to go through that process. But if you're cold calling, you have a better shot. Look, cold calling is a numbers game, okay?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you're going to get rejected. So you better get used to being rejected. But all you're looking for is the 1, 2, or 3 people who are going to answer that question.
Yes.
Because they're the ones who have an interest, and you can't sell to everyone. So you're getting rid of the people that are going to say no, and you get to the people that will say yes eventually.
I agree.
It's a way of qualifying.
Yeah, definitely is better than the first one. But I'm just finding sometimes if you just lead, one of the things I find in even that space, if you just leave a little bit of insight that you may have, tiny bit before they, and then they tend to open up, because I find what is people are so busy these days and so distracted that they're not very connected. Like they're not pausing like we talked about earlier. So sometimes you can just come in with something really simple, even on the stocks and bonds side of things, and go, I'm not here to talk to you about this, but I've just found about that. It might be crypto, it might be something,
Yeah, you're right. So there's different ways that you can do it. One way is to challenge the way they're doing it, and you don't know them personally, so in general.
Yeah.
So you can sit and say, look, the reason I'm calling you today, there are a lot of people that are planning for the future of their finances, but most of them are making the same mistake. And I wanted to share with you some things that help you avoid that.
Yeah.
So you soften it up and then you say, well, do you have time now? And they say, yes, I have time. I say, great. Then you get to that question so you get the information so that you can show them properly how you can help them.
Yeah.
If they're not willing to talk to you, or they don't want to schedule another meeting, then they're not your client. Don't waste your time.
No. But you know what I like about what you did then? A couple of things. One is the tone is so important, isn't it? And the way you softened your tone, it was a really good example. Hope our audio was cool enough to capture that, Ron, because that was awesome. But the other part we talked about was leadership. And I think you made a really good point. And we were talking about a sales example there, but sometimes when you go to talk to an employee, you're an interruption. And I think that was a great pearl of wisdom, because that is so true. And oftentimes leaders, especially what I call level 1 leader, in other words, I'm your boss, so you better listen. We kind of rock up and go, but you are actually interrupting them if they're doing something and focused. And so to have that little bit of empathy and understanding that, even as a boss or a leader, I'm interrupting, so I can have that conversation. You've obviously got a lot better rapport because you're in a working relationship than a cold call, but it's still important, isn't it, to have that tone right and asking that better question.
Well, yeah, but the pause is not so much for the other person, it is for you.
Yes, yeah. So
It
I
is
meant
for
for you.
you. It is for you to figure out what you want to do and make sure you're doing the right actions. I'll give you an example. So I was in the CEO's office of a client that I'm on retainer with for quite a few years. And one of the production supervisors came in a huff and a puff. Because that person, I go, what? He's on his damn cell phone. I said, what'd you do? I told him to go get off of it. And what did he do? He said, everybody else is on a cell phone. And what did you do? I yelled at him, you're 20 minutes late. And what happened? I walked away in a huff. I said, how well did that serve you? See, what happened was that supervisor let the emotion get in the way. He didn't pause.
Yeah.
So I replayed that. He was the person and I was him. I replayed the same dialogue and he said to me, I wouldn't even talk to me at that point.
Right.
I said, okay, now what do we know about the employee? He wants to become a master welder. Okay, what do you need for that? He needs quality and timeliness. How's his quality? Perfect. How's his timeliness? Well, he's 20 minutes late on this one job that caused this ruckus. I want you to go back out there and I want you to say, look, I know you want to be a master welder and you're well on your way. You need two things, quality and timeliness. Quality is perfect. We're 20 minutes behind just in this one job. What do you think we can do to get you back on track so you're still on track for the master welder? And miraculously, the guy started coming up with suggestions. So what was the difference? A, he paused, get rid of his emotion because emotion doesn't sell. Number two, what he did was he figured out that it's not the cell phone that was the issue. He was having the wrong argument. The issue was on getting him up to speed. And he found a way to get the guy emotionally connected to want to participate. The cell phone was not the issue, but he made it the issue. So as a leader, he didn't really take the time to look at what's happening, what's the real issue, and come up with a plan on how to formulate a conversation where both parties want to work together.
Isn't that a wonderful example? It's that quote Stephen Covey had. He said, in between stimulus and response, there's always a gap. What you do in the gap can determine your destiny. And that was a great one for the pause, wasn't it? But what I thought fascinating about that was that the welder who was the one who was suffering on the timeliness actually had solutions. And so it wasn't as though it wasn't something he hadn't thought about. He kind of knew, didn't he? He's kind of
but you're absolutely right. But the supervisor didn't ask that.
Yes.
He accused him for being on a cell phone. And what's the person going to do? Defend himself.
Yeah. Well, we're against the wall, aren't we? It's flight or fight, isn't it?
Right. So, but when he changed the context of the conversation to what's important to the other person, yes, then he put his guard down, his cortisol came down, and he started coming up with ideas. Meaning he started trusting the supervisor, the oxytocin was coming out, he started feeling good. Yeah. And lo and behold, he got back on time.
Yeah, it's just this importance of serving the other person, be it a customer or be it an employee, be it one of your team, is so important. Leads to my next question, which is around leaders gaining buy-in. You talk about velocity. Leaders, how do they gain buy-in fast? Because you can't scale on your own, and you can't scale on dependency. So getting buy-in fast is important. What are some of your thoughts around that?
Well, buy-in is so important that's actually going to be the slowest part of your journey. So when I started writing the Velocity Mindset, COVID hit, right? Speaking calendar dried up. I said, okay, let's go get the book done. I dedicated my book to my time to my book and to the consulting clients I had on retainer. And my publisher was a little nervous about the book to begin with because he goes, I've never seen a leadership book with self-help in the same manuscript. I said, trust me. And I hired a writer because this book, what people love about the book, there's a lot of expert storytelling that I didn't need a writer for that. But some of the stories were about me personally. Yeah. And what I went through in life. And I wanted to make sure it was done in the right way and not too, and I wasn't looking to do therapy on myself in front of everybody. So I hired a writer to assist me and make sure that the cadence was right. So I said to them, I said, look, this is March now. So we want to have this manuscript done by August. Let's concentrate on the table of contents and the outcome. Once that's done, the writing is easy. It took us till July to get it done.
Oh, really?
The table of contents and the outcome. Why? Because I was very specific where I wanted to go. It wasn't making sense. And I was getting resistance from them. And I said, look, once we got the roadmap, filling in the blanks is easy. We got the information. Sure enough, We got that done in the end of July. We didn't get the manuscript done in August. It was a month late, but we got the writing done in 2 months. And the book was written at the end of September.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I had to go for emergency heart surgery, so I had to rewrite the introduction to include that part.
Yeah, that's right. I read that. That was mind blowing in itself. It's worth the book in itself. that extra bit you put in because of this.
Because I used it to get through it. I had to envision what the success would look like, what I had to do.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Amazingly, I had a female surgeon who not only was really good at what she did, but she checked off every item in the box in the book. And I said to her, "You're gonna get a book from me sometime next year. It's gonna be about you in the introduction because I'm rewriting it." And sure enough, we did.
And Ron, that's so true. I mean, I really love that story that's in there, having read it, because it is a wonderful introduction, but it also sets the scene. And you're right. And she was really at the top of her game, which is fantastic for you. I've got to say, my friend, you're here today, and I'm excited for you moving to Florida as well, because that intuition for you, the body knows itself. We've got to listen to it. If we don't listen to it, well, then that's our problem. I think it really picked up. But yeah, getting that buy-in that's where friction comes in, doesn't it? So getting that buy-in is really important.
Yeah. So when I go into companies, and the CEO will say, "Hey, we're not getting results. All right, let me work. I want to do a strategic intent session with the C-suite. Make sure we're on the same page." "Oh, we're on the same page." I said, "I know. I still need to do that."
Yeah.
Now, what's their same page usually? They have a number that they want for revenues or EBITDA or whatever, profitability, but they're not on the same page on how to get there, nor are they on the same page whether or not they think it's possible.
Yes.
And so most of my work starts with that. And that can take a couple of months, but once we get that done, everything else becomes clear what they have to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Buy-in is so critical. And then one thing about people think they have it and they don't.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, they think they have it, and they clearly don't. They don't have it, and it's really only through discovery, and you're having cultural alignment sessions, and the sessions you run or I run, where you kind of find out actually this is not lining up. This is
right.
And it's so important to have a leader that's open to be able to hear that feedback.
Oh, that is such a huge point you said, because not only do they have to be open, they have to be vulnerable.
Yes.
I tell CEOs vulnerability sells. And it took me a long time. So I had a speech impairment when I was young. We put that in the book. It caused me a lot of grief and everything. When I was getting ready for my acceptance speech for the presidency of National Speakers Association, one of the past presidents was a good friend of mine. And she was helping me get ready. And she goes, "You need to address the elephant in the room." I go, "What?" She goes, "Your accent." My New York accent. Really? No one wants to hear that.
Spoken like a New Yorker, by the way.
So I developed a story about the speech impediment and how I couldn't enunciate the letter R. And I said, some brilliant guy names it with a word that starts with a letter I can't even enunciate. It's called rhoticism, or I can only call it oticism.
Yeah.
And then they were given the name Ron Karr. So, I build that story up and I talk about how I got through it. But then I say, it can still crop up today. And when it does, I just blame it on my New York accent. And the audience laughs.
Yeah.
Well, I started doing that in front of CEO groups. I was nervous the first time I did it, and all of a sudden I can't tell you how many CEOs come up to me saying, "I had the same issue when I was young."
Yeah.
So that was the emotional connection. And now they're ready to hear my ideas and buy into them. So yes, leaders have to be vulnerable. They have to not take it personally when people don't agree with them. All right. Sometimes they have to share some of their failures to help people understand that you learn by failures. People can't relate to people who are perfect. All right. And then they feel those people don't even understand them.
Yeah.
So you and I have colleagues, who pitch themselves as being this perfect entity is why you should hire them because they're so perfect. I don't do that. Here are my flaws. I'm a human being just like you do. I have my own fears. I got this. Now, together, let's figure out how we get through it so we can all get to where we want to be.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's a lot of pressure on people to, produce, whether it be, social media or other things like this, that produce this kind of ideal lifestyle, ideal leader, that's out there. And really, people also, I think many leaders don't understand what vulnerability is. It's not about airing some issue, some point. It's actually being vulnerable in the moment, being vulnerable about what you do. And even COVID, I think, helped a lot with that. And in terms of the pandemic, it helped people say, actually, as a true leader, I had people who are leaders who actually were either visible or invisible. That's what I found a lot in the early days of COVID. I don't know about you, Ron, but I found some of them went, I don't know what to do until I got my ducks lined up and I got a really good corporate story. I'm not talking to my people. I said, your people need you more than ever. They need your visibility, not your vision, right? They need you.
They want to know what's going on. They want you to be honest. They want you to tell them when you don't know, because they'll follow you more, at least because they know at least they're getting the truth out of you, number one.
Yeah.
But this is playing out right now in the U.S. For example, the tennis player from the U.S. team that was in France, she pulled out of the French Open.
Oh yeah, Naomi Osaka. Yeah.
Yes, because she couldn't deal with the pressure of the press, and it was negatively affecting her mentally, and she had issues. So now everybody says, "Oh, there goes her career." Well, today came out a story that 4 NFL players are banding together, talking about them suffering with depression. Things you would never see in a well-formed athlete.
Yeah.
But now they're talking about it because you have to talk about it. But actually, the people saying, "Oh, well, there goes their career." They're no longer going to be put up on a pedestal. Well, number one, they don't want to be put up on a pedestal. But number two, they know now that there's better value in being who they are all the way through than playing a game, because people will see through that game.
Yes.
And when they see through it, many times they get the wrong impression of who you are.
Yeah. True. Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, we've had similar things out here in Australia. We've had some sports people come out and really be open and honest and authentic. And one's a good friend of mine, a guy called Wayne Schross, is an AFL footballer. He runs a mental health organization now, and he's done some fantastic work in this space. Another one, friend of mine, Lance Piccioni, runs another foundation. And these guys are up there on just huge pedestals, but they've been able to come down and say, actually, you know what? Sometimes this was not a great game for me. I was struggling all through this, and they've done wonderful things. But because they've been so authentic, as you said, they don't want to be on a pedestal. But what they've done now is made it real, made it more real and approachable for people. But what I like about these two guys is they've actually gone out of their way to give people some tools and thoughts and skills to how they work through and what others can do.
And you know what the result is going to be? They'll even be on a higher pedestal right now because people can relate to them.
That's exactly what they are, and as I said, they don't want to be, but they also accept the fact that they're now, because they pioneered in this way, which is incredible vulnerability. So I think that's a really important one. Well, I'm just about out of time, but I've got a great question for you because I know your background, so I'm really interested in the answer. If you and I get back in the time machine, we went back and we caught up with 15-year-old Ron, what words of wisdom would you have for him?
I'm trying to think, because I was in a dysfunctional family because of the Holocaust. My dad was a victim, and so it was pretty stressful growing up in that environment. But if I went back to that kid that was petrified and had no confidence at all, I would probably start putting into his mind every moment I have the phrase, "You are more than enough."
Yeah.
Fantastic. And show him how he is more than enough. Because, there was none of that in my family. It was more the opposite. So
yes,
that's what I would do.
Yeah, very relatable, Ron. Very relatable. And I think people would really admire that. And that would be, more than enough. It's interesting. I always love this question. It's a fascinating one. And I thank you so much for our time today. It's been awesome. The Velocity Mindset is out now, Ron. So it's up on Amazon. It's all the regular places. We're going to put some stuff in the show notes about how to get in contact you. But can you give people your website address?
Sure. What's that? So if they go to the Velocity Mindset, no, it's not velocitymindset.com. They will get a link to buy the book if they want, but they'll also get a link to take a free leadership assessment.
Fantastic. Excellent.
And in that assessment is not just the questions, but there's the practical tips on how to move forward.
Yeah, brilliant. All right. There's some great stuff in there. Ron's an absolute rock star, ladies and gentlemen. The president of the NSA don't get there by being half-baked. Thank you so much for your time, Ron. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Rob, and all the best to your listeners.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this episode of the It's All Possible podcast. Please subscribe and rate the podcast you listen to so we can continue to serve you and inspire others. Remember, connect to us on all the social media channels. The It's All Possible podcast is hosted by me, Rob Hartnett, and produced by the phenomena that is Finn Hartnett. Connect with us via LinkedIn, Instagram, or the link tree in the show notes.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.